Hey everybody, welcome back to Movies in a Bottle. I'm your host Rhett, and today we're breaking down Chronicle. This is a found footage movie, which I think is a dying genre, but I think this one in particular has aged quite well. We see right from the start that the main character has decided to film his entire life, which is something that I just couldn't fathom happening whenever I saw this movie back in theaters in 2012. But with the rise of our modern streaming culture, I think this movie has only gotten more and more convincing at capturing our modern era. Alongside crazy superhero powers, of course. But let's roll film. We begin this tragic tale with the rudest of awakenings, and yes, I did say tragic. The camera suddenly brings everything into existence just as Andrew's father, Richard, was pounding on his locked door to get into his room. Sadly, this is an all too familiar situation for Andrew, and he calls his dad out for being drunk at 7:30 in the morning, but like all alcoholics, this only makes him significantly more angry. Before things can escalate further, Andrew frantically tells his dad that he's going to be recording everything from here on out, and that seems to calm the beast down for now. There's a drawing of a wounded knight on Andrew's door, and remember that because we'll come back to it much later. We next meet Andrew's mom, and we see that she's the exact opposite of his rage-filled father. She's kind and caring, but unfortunately, she's terminally ill and hooked up to machines in bed. She compliments Andrew's new camera and humors his recording until Andrew's cousin Matt comes and picks him up so they can go to high school. It ain't about the bubbling. On the ride over, Andrew also explains to Matt that he's filming everything from now on, and they shift between goofing off to lovably dated 2010s music and talking about the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. He's of course the guy who argues we're all just beings of pure will. This is a normal teenage conversation, right? Like I said, this is a found footage movie, so for anyone not familiar, everything we see is supposed to take place from a camera within the film. And Andrew first seems like he's only doing this to defend himself from his dad, but he actually means that he does record everything. And on that note, I think this is one of the best executed found footage movies out there, but it kind of gets to cheat the genre due to the superhero elements of the story. You'll see what I mean soon. Stay tuned. When they get to school, Andrew starts to take us through his normal day. He walks in and gets bombarded with propaganda to vote for the Golden Boy Steve Montgomery for class president. Sorry, Steve, Pedro's always got my vote. Then Andrew takes us to the bleachers where he normally eats lunch and promptly gets asked by a cheerleader not to record them. Very understandable. For the last stop of the day, we see a high school owner in their natural habitat when Andrew gets beat up by a bully. On the ride home, Matt continues to be a great cousin when he all but forces Andrew to get out of his shell and come to a senior party that's happening tonight. Then he gives Andrew some friendly advice not to bring the camera, but this movie wouldn't work if Andrew did that, so naturally he's gonna bring it anyways. But before that, he nearly gets jumped by some neighborhood thugs who notice his new tech, and then he definitely gets jumped by his alcoholic piece of garbage father who's still mad about being locked out this morning, and he demands that it better not happen again. At the party, Matt does the worst thing you can do to an introvert and leaves him alone to mingle. Then we get a point of view switch up when we briefly meet our movie's secondary photographer, Casey. But while Andrew is mostly just hiding behind the camera, she's confidently recording for her blog. Matt shows back up to hit on Casey by citing more philosophy, but rolled like a 4 on his charisma check, so she's not very impressed. Andrew goes back to aimlessly filming until he spends a few seconds too long recording a pretty girl dancing, then gets a drink tossed at him by a rightfully angry boyfriend. Afterwards, Andrew is outside cleaning off his camera when we meet Steve, played by a young Michael B. Jordan, and it's immediately clear why he's running for class president. He's genuinely kind-hearted, and he even remembers Andrew when they shared a homeroom during freshman year. But more importantly, he's here to ask Andrew to film an ominous cavern that he, Matt, and some other partygoers discovered. They trek through the woods, but by the time they get back to the pit, Matt is the only one waiting. At first they document this crazy high-pitched noise, but then curiosity gets to the best of the bravest member of their group, Steve. He leaps into the cave, followed by Matt, then reluctantly by Andrew, because Matt's his ride home, of course. In addition to the noise, they also smell something awful as they delve deeper into the cave, and the camera becomes riddled with glitches and distortions until they see something totally otherworldly. It's impossible for them to discern if the mysterious blue glow is emanating from something alien, something ancient, or something else altogether, but things appear to go horribly wrong when Steve gets too close to it. He gets a horrible bloody nose as the crystal shifts from a warm blue glow to a terrifying red one, and then they're all shoved out of the cave, leaving the camera behind. One of the two writers, Max Landis, was asked about the origins of their powers in a convention in 2013, and I'm going to read something and oversimplify this. The Big Blue Rock was a race of sentient crystals that only existed to burrow around eating other rocks and plants and stuff, but in the rare events whenever they do surface, terrible things happen like Area 51 or Roanoke. But they move around harnessing electromagnetism, and typically when people do make contact, they become mindless drones to exist only to help feed it. But the one in the movie was dying and only got far enough in the process to transfer its electromagnetic abilities, but not turn them into the mindless drones. Roughly 3 weeks have passed, and a new camera brings the world into existence once more as Andrew insists they need to document the things happening to them. Matt and Steve start by taking turns beaming each other with some seemingly impossible curveballs, but when a ball is thrown at Andrew, he somehow stops it in midair. Then before too long, they progress to playing catch with their telekinesis. This is basically the gist of half the movie, so I hope you like telekinetic teenage troublemaking. Anyways, they're practicing further, and Andrew's trying to explain how to psychically connect Lego pieces together to Matt, but he just can't do it. Then Andrew demonstrates just how much further along he is whenever he assembles the whole Seattle Space Needle in just moments. After a while, they all get curious about their powers and go back to the cave for answers, but when they get there, it's completely filled in with dirt. Before they can look any further, park rangers tell them to clear out since the ground's unstable there. Steve is giving Andrew a ride home from Matt's one night, and Steve wants to know his new friend better, so he asks Andrew about his dad. He doesn't mention all the abuse, but he does share that his dad is an ex-firefighter who now just collects insurance money and drinks a lot. Steve feels like his problems pale in comparison and almost stays silent, but does confide that he's having problems with his parents too. He thinks his mom's cheating, but then he asks for Andrew's secrecy. As Andrew winds down for the night, he tries to escape his heartbreaking situation by training his powers instead of listening to his dad argue with healthcare workers about his wife's worsening condition and her ever-increasing medical costs. Before we get back to teenage antics, Andrew records a couple of tough conversations. The first is with his mom when she tells her son that how he is right now is how she wants to remember him. Then she reminds him that he's strong. Before we hop to the second conversation with Andrew's seemingly only other kind family member, Matt. Andrew asks Matt if he likes him, and although Matt's clearly caught off guard, he does reassure his cousin that he does. Then the two ponder if maybe there's something greater they could be doing with their abilities, promptly before they regroup with Steve for more regularly scheduled goofing off. They've deduced the more they practice, the stronger they get, kinda like working a muscle, and then Andrew shows them something really fascinating he's learned while they're at a diner. He suddenly stabs Matt's hand with a fork, but the fork bends. Andrew explains that as long as they're ready for an attack, they're shielded. Then after they're done being total menaces at the diner, Steve really shows off his abilities by moving a parked car at a supermarket, leaving the driver totally perplexed and him with a terrible nosebleed. Due to budgetary reasons, this movie was mostly shot in Cape Town, South Africa, and although it's supposed to take place in Seattle, the steering wheel being on the wrong sides of cars in the background kinda gives it away. Later on, the three are driving home during a storm, reliving the hype of their pranks when an angry driver starts to honk at them. Then Andrew gets the not-so-bright idea to show off his abilities too, and has Steve hold the camera while he proceeds to nearly murder a man by shoving his truck into a river below. While Andrew and Matt are in a panic, it's Steve that just jumps into the water to save the driver. They call the cops, and since it appears he just swerved off the road, they get away with it. That night, Matt is beginning to realize just how dangerous they can be, but Andrew doesn't really seem to understand the seriousness of what he did. To keep everyone else from getting hurt while they get stronger, Matt quickly thinks of 3 rules that Steve also agrees to. 1. No powers on living things. 2. No powers when you're angry. And 3. No more powers in public. Those rules are pretty thorough, I can get behind that, but this movie doesn't really fill in the gaps between scenes very much because it's found footage, so if it ever feels like we're suddenly jumping around a lot, that's because we are. While on another drive, Andrew feels like Matt is giving him the cold shoulder, so Andrew asks him if he's still mad, but Matt reassures his cousin that he's not, they just need to be more careful. They get to their destination in the middle of nowhere, but they can't seem to find Steve. That is until they get a text from him to look up, and that's right, he can fly and he teaches the others how to as well. Like the rest of their powers, Andrew's a natural and it takes Matt a second to get it, but when Matt does, he's actually really great at flying. Soon they're flying around like bona fide superheroes playing games like tag and catch, but then they start to hear a strange noise, and then a plane bursts through some nearby clouds and knocks Steve unconscious. It sends everything into a tailspin, but with a true demonstration of skill, Andrew not only saves Steve, but he has time to save the camera too. Steve proclaims they're the next Wright brothers. They can fly! The 3 amigos are crashing at Steve's house and winding down for the night when it's Matt's turn to be vulnerable. He tells his friends that he's been thinking about it and this was the best day of his life, and they can't help but to agree. The 3 lead actors did a ton of press interviews together, and during those, they talked about how they lived in a house together for 2 weeks to help build their genuine on-screen chemistry. And adding to that, the writer, director, and 3 lead actors were all in their 20s, which they said helped add to that chemistry as well. And something that surprised me is they said that 90% of the dialogue was actually scripted, but to me it felt very improvised in a good way. At school the next day, they're deciding which vacation spot would be the best way to use their newfound powers of flight, and Steve says Maui, which seems normal. But then Andrew says Tibet, which does not seem normal. Andrew explains that it seems beautiful. The monks are supposedly incredible, but most importantly, it seems peaceful. Matt's on board and says he'd like to go too. After school, Matt uses the old "it's my mom's birthday" excuse to suddenly leave his friends, and since they don't want to go home, they decide to skip traffic and fly downtown. Meanwhile, Matt actually dropped by to see his friend Casey again. Since she's a dedicated blogger, well ahead of her time, she opens the door with the camera already rolling. Quickly getting past the camera, Matt tries to connect with her about some charities she's blogged about, but she doesn't seem interested. As she closes the door on Matt, he confesses that he never meant to come across as being better than anyone. He just tried to separate himself from the high school popularity contest before it ever started. He wants her to know that he's past all that nonsense now, and Matt thinks he's totally blown this conversation as he stammers on, but she reassures him that he hasn't. Andrew and Steve are enjoying the view of downtown Seattle from the skyscraper, and they use this time to get to know each other a little bit, outside of just talking about their shared superpowers. First, Steve confesses how his mom mom is always gone, but he can't really talk to his dad about it because he's withdrawn. Andrew can't really sympathize well because, unlike Steve, who's always been popular, Andrew doesn't really have friends to talk about his much worse situation with. They talk for a while, but as the night ends, Steve suddenly remembers the upcoming talent show and asks Andrew to compete together. Andrew goes on to have another polarizing night with his parents before he leaves for the talent show. His dear old mom is excited for his big night, but his jerk of a dad doesn't care about it at all. In fact, Richard only threatens Andrew because he's suspicious of him ever since Matt stopped picking him up for school. Jumping to the talent show, it's a pretty typical high school affair. There's a rock band, a dance routine, and some other junk, I don't know. Then the main event begins. Of course, everybody already adores Steve, so the crowd is electric when he comes on stage. But the crowd starts to calm down when Andrew appears, then the two seem to fumble their routine completely when Andrew drops his deck of cards. The crowd erupts into laughter as they argue on stage, but then they fall silent when the real show starts. Andrew first uses his powers to pick up all the cards in seconds before moving on to using them for juggling, tightrope walking, and juggling while tightrope walking. The crowd goes wild. On their way to an after party, Matt jokingly warns his cousin to be careful with all this attention. Hubris will be his end. Sure, Matt. But whatever happened to Rule 3? I guess you can use your powers in public if it helps get you laid? Ah, high school. At said after party, things have 180'd. It is now Matt that's holding the camera and everyone is stoked to see Andrew. And even better yet, a cute girl with pink hair starts to get pretty friendly with Andrew, and she doesn't have to twist his arm much to get him to try out the high school rite of passage, beer pong. As the night goes on, Steve tells Matt that Andrew's upstairs with a pink-haired girl, and Matt feels very proud of his cousin, so he goes on a very drunk, very sweet rant into the camera about how much he loves him and how things are going to get better from here. Sadly, Andrew's had a bit too much to drink because when they go check on him, Monica is storming out covered in barf, and Andrew is beyond humiliated to be seen in that state. What the three didn't know at the time was how this party would be the last time they get to feel free like this before the harsh world would catch up to them. So Monica, the pink-haired girl who's all over Andrew until he blows chunks on her, is played by Anna Wood. That's Dane DeHaan's wife in real life, and the two have been married since 2012, the year this movie came out, and now they have a couple of kids together according to IMDb. Later, Andrew decides to break Rule 1 and test out his powers on a little spider in the attic. At first he only lifts it, and then he extends all of its legs before detaching all of them. What a psycho. I mean, I know it's only a spider, but still. Then everything comes crashing down when Richard snoops through Andrew's room while he's trying to find his mom's much-needed medicine. Richard begins by confronting his son about finances and how he's goofing off with Matt and Steve on camera, but then it takes an awful turn when Andrew's anger boils over and he calls his dad an idiot for saying something pretty stupid. Richard starts to go about mercilessly hitting his son like he always does when he's this mad, but this time Andrew breaks rules 1 and 2 and counters by pinning his father to the wall and threatening to crush him. Through Casey's constant blogging, we can see that due to Andrew's encounter, Matt is suffering nosebleeds and headaches, and Steve likely is too because he keeps calling. Speaking of Steve, their shared pain leads him up into a storm where he finds Andrew hiding from the world. Steve tries his hardest to comfort Andrew and make him believe that they really are friends, but the more he tries, the more Andrew withdraws, until he unexpectedly lashes out, somehow bending lightning to fatally strike his friend. Everyone is heartbroken as they mourn the loss of the beloved Steve Montgomery, everyone except for Matt, who just stares daggers into the camera and into Andrew. As the funeral wraps up, Matt confronts his cousin about why he's been avoiding him. How was Steve struck by lightning in a storm with no recorded lightning strikes, and why'd they find his body in a random field? Andrew refuses to explain, and he also refuses to put the camera away, breaking Rule 3 about no powers in public. Being unable to face what he's done, Andrew flies away, but later returns alone to beg Steve's grave for forgiveness and to say that he misses him. Andrew continues to spiral out of control at school. His bully makes fun of him for barfing at the party, so Andrew telekinetically yanks some of his teeth out, which is a super normal response. Then we get some more context on his spiral whenever he blogs about how he's been studying the concept of the apex predator. The apex predator thing felt edgy in 2012 and it still feels edgy now, but he describes it as the thing on top of the food chain that doesn't have to feel bad about hurting anything below it. Then to demonstrate his power, he crushes a car behind him. After school, Matt flies into Andrew's room to discuss what's been going on and to say that he can't keep breaking the rules. Andrew screams that he isn't going to break Matt's stupid rules, but makes it clear that he doesn't think Matt could stop him even if he wanted to, and that he doesn't want to see him anymore either. To kind of prove his point, Matt tries to give Andrew a well-deserved punch to the face, but he can't, so he just flies away instead. Even amongst everything happening to Andrew, he still wants to do right by his mother and makes her comfortable in bed before trying to go get her medication, but the copay is a staggering $750. I love the attention to detail here when Andrew actually uses his dad's ill-fitting firefighter gear to hide his identity while he makes some quick cash for the medicine. Then Andrew must think who better to rob than the robbers themselves, you know, like a who watches the watchman type thing, but Andrew pays the neighborhood thugs a visit and they recognize him instantly through his poorly veiled disguise, but that doesn't matter. He viciously attacks them with his abilities and takes their cash, but after counting it out, it's not nearly enough. He needs to think bigger if he's going to save his mom, so he robs a gas station, but while making his escape, the clerk tries to fire a shotgun at him. Andrew reacts quickly and pulls the gun away, but he's catastrophically injured by the resulting explosion caused by the gunfire. Going back to writer Max Lanus in that 2013 convention, he said if they kept going with him on board, The second movie would have introduced anti-heroes trying to figure out the origins of their powers, but it all would have culminated in a third movie that had a second crystal, the one that actually killed the first crystal, showed up and mind-controlled a whole town, and Matt has to show up and stop it. Richard visits his injured and unconscious son in the hospital, and for the first time, we see him break down sobbing at Andrew's bedside. But no, he's not crying about the state of his son. He's crying because his wife/Andrew's mom passed away last night. Then instead of trying to come together and grieve as a family, Richard blames his son for making him leave to look for him last night. He screams at Andrew to sit up and apologize, but whenever he nearly strikes his son again, Andrew suddenly catches his hand and the hospital room violently explodes. Picking up with Casey's blogging, Matt feels that shared pain again and instantly recognizes that something must be wrong with Andrew. Matt and Casey follow the breaking news stories to the hospital and see that Andrew has completely lost it whenever he tries to drop his father to his death. Matt can't just let his uncle die, so he flies up and saves him at the cost of exposing his power. In the original script, Andrew's dad, Richard, suffers the same fate as that spider in the attic, but they toned it back to keep a PG-13 rating and to help add to Matt's character. Andrew flies further downtown, and Matt and Casey do their best to follow in her car, but Andrew sets his sights on them and pulls their car up to him at the Space Needle, you know, the thing he built with Legos earlier. Now appearing totally detached, Andrew tries to drop them to their death, but Matt manages to break out and sets Casey down somewhere safe before trying to reason with his cousin. Like with Steve earlier, Matt pours his heart into trying to convince Andrew that they're in this together, and even going a step further, Matt sincerely apologizes for not always being there and says that he is here now. Matt's words aren't enough to get through to Andrew, and he withdraws again, muttering to himself that he's the apex predator before launching a bus at Matt. Their fight takes them all over town, on rooftops, through buildings, and eventually down to the streets when Matt knocks Andrew out against a streetlight. Matt begs the enclosing law enforcement to help, but when Andrew wakes up, he lashes out again, sending the officers flying. The two take flight one last time, but soon careen into a statue in the middle of an open plaza. Andrew climbs to his feet first as more and more cops surround them. Matt wakes up and this time begs Andrew not to keep hurting people, but he still can't get through to him. The police begin to open fire and Andrew stops all of their bullets and sends them flying backwards. Then Matt looks around at all the chaos and destruction that Andrew is causing and hopelessly begs for him to stop one last time. Then after facing the brutal truth that Andrew has become the villain, Matt makes the impossible decision to use the spear from the nearby statue to fatally impale his cousin to save the rest of the city. Remember that picture of the wounded knight in the beginning? It definitely foreshadowed Andrew's tragic fate. Matt briefly faints, but when the police cautiously approach, he jets off into the sky. Some time passes and we continue to fly all around the world with Matt, and he eventually lands in some snowy mountains and greets the camera saying, "Hey Andrew." Using this as a means for closure, Matt apologizes and says that he knows Andrew wasn't a bad person, and he vows to learn about these powers and do good with them for him and Steve. Matt wishes that he had told Andrew that he loved him while he was still here, but he does have a surprise for him. He moves the camera over to reveal that he's in Tibet, saying, "You made it." Then he musters whatever joy he has left to celebrate before saying his final goodbye to his cousin and leaving the camera rolling on the piece that Andrew never found. Alright, that's a wrap. It still blows my mind that this movie never got any sequels, considering it made $126 million on a budget of only $15 million. And not a lot of people know this, but the director Josh Trank still holds the record for being the youngest director to hold number one at the box office, being 27 at the time of release. He dethroned Steven Spielberg, who was 28 for the release of Jaws. But let me know if you'd still like to see any more sequels, and subscribe to catch another breakdown just like this next week. But y'all be good. I'll see you then. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end. Remember, if you want to revisit any more of your favorite movies, check the links on screen, but otherwise, subscribe and I'll catch you for a new breakdown next week. Thanks.